Welcome to the Aliya Matheson Show. I'm your host, Aliya Matheson, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of feminism. But before we get into it, there has been a lot of censorship going on social media, especially Facebook and Instagram. They have all new guidelines, and I want to kind of talk about that in a different episode, but just to bring that to your guys' awareness, because who knows how long I'm going to be on this platform. They might be taking me down anytime soon because, as you know, I talk about all of the things that will get you censored. So all that to say, if you want to follow me, I'm going to be making an email newsletter slash chain list. So I want you guys to be able to keep up with where I'm going if I move to different platforms. Also, I want to be able to get my podcast to you via email so that you can follow it. I'm going to try out some other platforms like Rumble and stuff to see if I'll get taken down on those. Pretty much just jumping back and forth to different platforms and making sure that I don't get taken down and that you can watch my content somewhere.
Well, hold on. This is what you wanted. You wanted to make a show that gets you censored, right? That's your motto.
So it's my motto because it's reality. It's not like I want to be censored, but it's also just a part of the reality of being a conservative, and we're not really welcome in mainstream society anymore. They're trying to just erase conservatives from society. It's really sad time to be alive, but it's okay because we're getting out there, and they feel threatened. That's why they're trying to shut us down, because they feel threatened by that. So what you can do is you can donate to my Patreon or to my Venmo, and you can help us. We want to build a website. That way you guys can just go directly to the website, but it costs money, and we need your guys' help. So definitely do that. But getting into today's show, we have an awesome guest with us. Her name's Anneliese, and she has a account on Instagram called Feminine, Not Feminist. And she talks a lot about being a biblical feminine woman and how feminism has kind of not done for women what it claims to do. It doesn't give liberation to women. And we're just going to kind of dive into this topic today. So welcome, Anneliese.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, your Instagram account is awesome. I mean, I don't even know how I found you, but I just started following you, and you've grown even a lot since I've followed you. You have what now? 25,000 followers now. And
yeah.
Seems like a lot of women are interested in this topic, which is great.
Yes.
Because we're kind of seeing a comeback of the homemaking, and seeing a lot of YouTube channels about that, and just regular feminine women, and not trying to be men and trying to be something we're not. And it's completely radical and countercultural in a world where right now we're seeing even breastfeeding being attacked, and they want to change it to chest feeding because all people can breastfeed, and transgender men can breastfeed, and they're saying birthing peoples and stuff, and it's kind of getting lumped in with transgenderism and all this other stuff too, and it's almost like women are caricatures now.
It's just nuts.
But I kind of wanted to discuss your definition of feminism, because the dictionary defines feminism as the belief in a full social, economic, and political equality for women. And they always say oh, you don't understand feminism. It's just equality for women. What do you feel about that? Do you think it's an accurate representation of the feminist movement?
I think every person you ask is going to have some variation of that definition. And for some people, it's going to be on one end of the spectrum. And honestly, yeah, feminism is a spectrum. And so depending on who you're talking to, you just have to find out what they're saying. And I realized that it is a spectrum. And when I'm referring to it, I think people know that I'm referring to what it has become and its implications for it's tied in with the transgender stuff. It's tied in with, LGBTQ, all this kind of stuff. And so when I use that word feminism, obviously someone could come and say, well, that's not how I define it. And I'm like, I think most people know what I'm referring to. I'm referring to, those going and marching in the streets with their pink hats, just that caricature of the angry feminist that maybe to some people is a straw man, but it's an actual reality. And that is where it has ended up, like it or not. So yes, the dictionary definition, which we can talk about that also.
Right.
It's a spectrum. So
Yeah, and I guess they would kind of label it now. What we're seeing is third wave feminism. Like before, it was like about voting rights, and I'm like, cool. I'm happy that we're able to vote. Like, great.
Yeah.
But now it's like lumped in with like healthcare, and healthcare meaning abortion, and it's like you're not a feminist if you're not for women being slutty and stripping down, and like apparently that's liberation for women, is just kind of doing whatever you want with zero consequences, it seems like, and acting kind of like a pig. It's like if
men get to be pigs, we get to be pigs too. It's like, how about we all just don't act like pigs?
Yeah, it's this kind of like, it's when I think of feminism, I think of like this full approval of whatever seems right to the woman at the moment. Because even saying, hey, like we shouldn't dress immodestly, or we shouldn't dress, slutty, like, well, you're discriminating against me, you're slut shaming, you're shaming sex workers, like, it's so I think of it as just the full approval of whatever sinful thing is in vogue,
Exactly. No, I agree with you 100%. So like what made you so different? Like were you always this way? Were you at one point a feminist and came out of that? Or I know you're a Christian, how does your faith play into this? Just tell me a little bit about your journey with this topic.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in a very conservative family, and I never considered myself a feminist. I think at one point I had said, oh, like I believe in equality or whatever. So if that makes me feminist, I'm a feminist,
Right.
But I always had an inward repulsion to it. And I grew up with such a good father, and amazing brothers, and just like, I could see there's this war on men, and yet like having a good father is the number one influence in my life apart from being a Christian. So I was just immediately repulsed by the attack on men, which is part and parcel with feminism. And then I began to realize that even though I was verbally rejecting feminism, I still had certain ways of thinking that were kind of unknowingly, I had imbibed some of its more subtle assumptions. And I didn't realize this until I got married, and the way I was interacting with my husband, I began to see this entitled spirit, and I thought, this is an awful lot like feminism. I've never called myself a feminist, but I'm seeing this trend here, and there's this entitlement. And so I when I'm talking to someone, I never would have called myself a feminist, but what I say is I definitely had to shed off, and I'm still shedding off remnants of it, because it is so pervasive in our society. It's almost impossible not to be affected by it.
Right. And the mindset just kind of creeps in, like you don't even really recognize it. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I don't even believe this. So your like account is called Feminine, Not Feminist. And like, I want to know, what do you think is kind of the main issues with feminism? Like, how is it steering women in the wrong direction? Because obviously it has an appealing factor, and that's why so many women kind of fall into it. So what about it do you think is steering women in the wrong ways, and kind of doing the opposite effect of liberation?
Well, I think two of its main talking points are praise and approval. So not only are your behaviors, whatever you want to do, to be approved, but they're also to be praised. And so we have this like, we're perfect, I'm good the way I am, body positivity kind of culture that is just all about praising and approving, whereas the Bible is full of correction, and loving rebuke. And so biblically, I can't align with a movement that is more interested in like praising me and not calling out of my faults. Like I have to align with the biblical worldview that is, no, there's sin in me. There's particular sins I struggle with because I'm a woman, and there are certain things that are just more innate to us. And so I just fundamentally reject this idea that I need a movement to uphold me and support me when the Bible already has everything I need. It has everything I need for correction, and it also has everything I need to live an empowered life. And empowerment, as defined by our world, is so, it just misses the mark so badly. But empowerment, Christian empowerment, is dying to yourself, putting away sin, loving other people sacrificially. That is in line with the spirit of Christ, not feminism. So
right. And then also the whole aspect of feminism being women are the same as men. It's like pits women and men on the same exact level. And of course, we're all equal in value. But in terms of roles, like they don't acknowledge the distinctions between like men and women. Just like we're weaker, like facts, basic facts. It's like offensive to say that. Like you see these, for instance, in women's sports, we have men who are transgender coming into women's sports, and then they're beating all these records, and you have men coming into women's UFC and breaking skulls of all these women, and it's like, this is not okay. Like they're built completely differently, their genetics are different, like, and that's okay. Like we can have babies and men can't, so like that's pretty cool. I mean, we have a lot to offer too that men have other things that they offer, and that's okay. We're different, we're built different, and we don't need to be the same and treated exactly the same because we're not the same.
It's crazy because like they'll say, hey, you know, you can't narrowly define femininity is whatever you want it to be, but then in the same breath they'll have these stereotypes of femininity, and if a man wants to do that, it's like, you know, they're a woman. So it's so hypocritical because they reject gender stereotypes, but then they apply them to men and they're celebrated. So
yeah, because it's like, what is femininity, right? Like, what is being a woman? Like, I always want to ask people who are very into non-binary and all that stuff. It's like, what is a woman? Like, is it the fact that we have a woman brain? Because they would say that doesn't exist, right? But if you're a guy and you have a woman brain, then you might be transgender. So it's like, like you said, it's just completely hypocritical, and then they take stereotypes that they don't want women to have because they're constantly trying to break stereotypes that women deal with. I mean, even in our movies, like women are constantly like fighting and doing all this stuff that men are doing, and that's like the cool woman. That's the woman all the kids want to be like, not the mom or the homemaker or you know, women in traditional roles, the nurturing type women. It's like, oh, I'm gonna kick your butt type women. That's what we want to see, or that's what is approved of in society, and it's just very twisted.
Double standards all over the place.
Right. So like when you hear the term women's rights, what do you think of?
So it depends whose mouth that's coming out of. And generally when I'm hearing it, it's coming from someone who would align with, you know, third wave feminism. So yeah, I mean, the word rights, we have, you know, an understanding from the Bible and from our Constitution what we are, not what we deserve, but like what we're entitled to by virtue of our citizenship and by being made in the image of God. We have certain rights, and it's like, yeah, totally, like life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, you know. But then rights has been twisted to mean, well, you know, you can get your right even if it harms other people. So abortion, it's not about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because it might be your pursuit of happiness. It's not the child's pursuit of happiness. And so a right, you know, an innate right that we have cannot be harmful to someone else. It cannot go against someone else's right. And so as soon as it starts harming other people, no, like I just reject that. And if it doesn't align with God's created order and what he's revealed in his word, that's not my right as a woman. That's stepping outside my boundary, outside my God-given right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the abortion thing is one of the biggest things. And I saw a post and it said something like men aren't allowed to speak on the topic of abortion because they don't have a uterus, but you can be a woman without having a uterus in liberal like ideology. It's just,
Right.
like it just make sense. Like it just doesn't make sense on any level, and it gets so confusing trying to follow the logic. And that's what God says, like when we don't believe in God, we're just fools. Like we just sound like fools. We can't even, I mean, if truth is just whatever you want it to be, then it ceases to even be truth at that point. Like it's not truth objectively. It's just sad to see young girls growing up with this kind of toxic mentality. And when I hear words like toxic masculinity and stuff, it's like, well, females can be toxic too. It's like,
yeah,
That's
sin is toxic. Sin
exactly.
is toxic. Hurting other people, it's just toxic.
mm-hmm. So what got you so passionate about this particular topic that you wanted to make an account dedicated to this topic?
Yeah, so going back to kind of my marriage, because I got married in 2018 and the first 2 years were woo. I would say, you know, we had a very up and down sort of relationship because I came into this with an attitude of kind of like fighting for my rights. And so let me give you an example so that doesn't be misconstrued. You know, we got married. My husband, like, we want to have a budget, and doing things like going and getting Starbucks drinks and spending whatever didn't fit in the budget. I didn't like that, you know. So I would go to other people and complain, and they would tell me things like, he's controlling. You know, and in reality, if someone were to come in and be like, no, he has a budget, and as the man of the house, he would like you to stick to the budget. There's nothing controlling about this. He's just being a good steward. But right. So different examples like that, where I took these things, and instead of a biblical approach of submission and, you know, it's okay, I don't need to get everything I want, I took it as an attack on my rights. You know, he wasn't allowing me to find myself, to be who I wanted to be, right? I felt stifled. I felt like my journey to self-actualization was being infringed upon by his, you know, rules and all this. So I had a few months where God started to break all of that down. He started to show me my sin in that, and how I had created this narrative in my mind against my husband that was an absolute lie. I had constructed this huge lie, and I had propagated it. So God showed me that. It was a very few painful months, and it was kind of up and down. As things were starting to level out and our marriage was becoming more peaceable, I just felt like, wow, I have all this I just went through, and I just want to share it with someone. And so I think the first thing I posted, besides an introduction, was something like, you know, never compare your husband to another man. And, you know, simple, bad editing too on the photo, like nothing eloquent about it. But people just started to resonate because I was speaking from a place of, I have made so many mistakes in my marriage, and I'm going to be open about them. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to tell you not to do what I did. So that's what got the page started, is just kind of a season of pruning from the Lord, a season of breaking me of myself, and then allowing me to pour myself out to share with others. So
that's really awesome. And I have so much respect for that. How do you think, so you kind of had this like rough patch in your marriage, as I'm sure most people do. It's the first years of marriage, they say, are like the hardest. And kind of trying to rewire your brain into thinking biblically. Submission is one of those like words that everyone gets triggered by. Can you kind of go into your definition of submission and what that looks like in a biblical setting? Because people automatically go to extremes like, oh, abuse or control, or like, oh, how dare he, like, so in light of feminism, like, where does submission fit in for a Christian woman?
Yeah. So I think it's important to realize that we all submit to somebody, and for most of us to multiple things. I mean, if you have a job, you submit to your boss.
Mhm.
We submit in order for society to function normally. You know, there has to be authority. And if the family, or you know, a couple is kind of a microcosm of that, you have to have authority in order for things to get done. And so people will say, oh, well, so you don't talk to your husband, you never compromise. It's like submission happens, you know, when we've talked through it. I've expressed how I feel, he expresses how he feels, and sometimes he's going to have to make the final call. That's where submission comes in, and I say, okay, that's fine.
Right.
And so it's been characterized to be like you not having a voice. And I think more accurately, it's in a biblical marriage, like speaking to one another, but recognizing that at the end of the day, we can't keep rehashing the same talking points and ending up nowhere. When something needs to get done, someone has to make a decision. And
Mhm.
so I don't think it's a very, I mean, it's difficult, but it's not a crazy thing for the Lord to command that one party needs to step back and submit their will to the other person. How on earth would anything get done if we were in
Mhm.
this loop of trying to prove ourselves? So
Right.
there's so much that could be said on the topic of biblical submission. And like you said, it's been so misunderstood, and people will just prop up straw man arguments. And
Right.
it's kind of a way of shutting it out from what the majority of us are dealing with. You know,
Right.
it's things like the budget, it's things like to homeschool or not to homeschool, it's things like moving states, to have more kids, to not have more kids, like difficult things, big issues. But you know, not not always these straw man arguments that people like to come in and prop up. So
Yeah, of course. And they always love to leave out the part about like the husband loving their wives, like to literal death, up to the point of death, like being willing to die for their wife. I mean, if you have that kind of man who is literally loving you like Christ loves the church, which is in the context of that verse, and it's easy to submit, like it's a willful submission. I don't know if you know John MacArthur. He's like a pastor
yeah,
in
yeah,
California.
yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, and he has some great sermons on like what submission looks like, and he talks a lot about how it's a willful, like we want to submit
Yes.
because we know that they have our best interest in mind, and we should see that in the love that the man has for us. So it's a hard calling for the men too. It's not like the women are getting the bad end of the stick and it's just like obey to this tyrant. It's
Right.
like God calls us both to hard roles, and we both, when we're both doing those roles biblically and we're actually doing them properly, it's easy. It should be easy on both sides, but because we're sinners, it isn't always the easiest thing, you know?
The question I always have for people is kind of like you said, oh, we're submitting to this tyrant. And my question is, did you have an arranged marriage? Did you not pick this person? Because
Right.
it's like you get married and then suddenly your husband becomes this monster you don't want to submit to. And
The
it's
enemy,
like,
number one.
yeah, yeah. Like, did you not choose him? Was your marriage arranged? Like,
Right.
so.
Hands up in the comments if your marriage was arranged.
Yeah, maybe it was, you know, but.
No, I love that what you talk about, and I think it's important for women to see this other side of things, because I feel like it's so shoved down our throats, like you're a strong, independent woman, do whatever you want, and the other side of things, the traditional things that made women awesome, like being the people who stay home and make the home kind of a haven and take care of the children. It's like those are noble callings, and they're kind of just like disrespected and slapped around, because apparently the highest calling is being a man and doing what men do. It's like it's kind of anti-feminist if you think about the way they kind of create derogatory like connotations with traditional feminine traits.
Yes.
But I guess one of the things I would like to know too is how do people, if they want to kind of get on this journey of being more feminine, how would they go about doing that? Like, I'm sure it was a learning curve for you, especially if you already have a lot of friction in your marriage. And, you know, how do you kind of go about becoming more feminine and kind of unwiring the feminist in your brain?
So first of all, you have to realize that, you know, femininity is not a cookie cutter mold. And so that's one of the only points that I can agree with, I don't know, like modern feminists on, is that
Right.
no, there isn't one way to be a woman, right? Again, it's a spectrum, and there are certain things that where I would disagree is, yeah, there are certain things that it's not a way to be a woman, you know?
Right.
But understanding that it is a spectrum, and so not entering that journey with this expectation of I'm going to look exactly like so and so, and just trying to copy and paste what being a biblical woman looks like for them onto your life, because God did make you unique, you know? And so I think sometimes people, you know, for instance, like I grew up playing all the sports and had 3 brothers, and I've done lots of like difficult jobs of, you know, physically strenuous jobs and stuff. And I've never made it this, I'm not feminine as I'm doing this kind of thing, you know, because I didn't narrowly define femininity to being void of all physical toil or not ever getting dirty or anything like that. Like that's nowhere in the Bible. So
Right.
I think that's the first thing to realize, is that you can't copy and paste someone else's house, face, style. You're your own person. And then just finding out who that person is and unlearning all the like subtly acquired masculine or worldly traits that are in you as you get to know the Lord more, as you read his word. It just kind of flows naturally out of knowing God, and he'll make you the kind of feminine woman that he wants you to be, you know, and that's going to look different for me than it looks like for you. And so sometimes within the feminine community, there is a little bit of a pressure, like, I don't know, very narrow niches, but like, you know, you got to wear makeup, you got to always be like shaved and all this kind of stuff. And like, if that's the criteria, like I'm definitely not feminine, you know? So I think it's just so important to know that it flows out of like knowing God, union with Christ, the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And then, you know, as you're wanting to, if you look at someone and take inspiration from them and you say, they do this, I think that's really cool. And you just try it out in your own life, not in this, like, I have to be them way, but some things are harder to cultivate and it doesn't always flow easily. So those are just some thoughts I've acquired as I've gone about my journey. But
yeah, and I've noticed that's what I love about you is there's a lot of women out there who are kind of in this culture of femininity, and they talk a lot about it, and they kind of have like, and which is fine. Like
it's awesome
if you have like a bubbly personality and you talk like a fairy, and you know,
like
it's totally
but
fine.
It doesn't have
to be that. And I love that you're bold and you speak the truth, and like I feel like a lot of women can also kind of hide behind this like kindness is the ultimate virtue thing, and they don't like to speak the truth on certain matters. And I love that you're super bold on your Instagram and you talk about hard topics and you don't sugarcoat them, but you're also feminine and you're you fight for Christian biblical values without, you know, kind of just sugarcoating everything, which is awesome.
Right.
So I really appreciate you coming on to the show. Everybody go follow her account. It's called Feminine Not Feminist. She has great content, and we're going to be having some awesome guests the next couple of weeks. So be sure to be here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. We'll see you on the next one.